We primarily work with high net worth families. I have never seen the amount of business in the last 6 months. I'm turning people away. I can't even take them all. All this advice I'm giving is based on major scenarios, long-term events, long-term grid down event, starvation, disease, societal collapse, 90% of the population can die in the first year. You don't want to be near people. Bioengineered weapon, grid down event, whatever the case may be. You got to get out day one or day two. You either bug out and wander the open road or live off national forest, or I stay in my house in the city. It's a matter of time. Your house is not defensible. You have to sleep sometime. My professional opinion, you have to get out of mass population centers. Your best chance of survival is having a place where you have food and where you have the least amount of human interaction for that first year until the mass die-off is done.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back once again with my special guest, Jonathan Hollerman, who's a former military SERE instructor, that stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Instructor. He's the CEO of Grid Down Consulting, Deputy Director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security, and the author of numerous books, including Survival Theory, a Preparedness Guide, How to Survive the End of the World on a Budget. So today we get to talk about my favorite topic, a little break from the doom and gloom, and actually talk about prepping stuff. So how are you doing today, buddy? I hear you're very busy lately.
Yes, it's been 12 years in business now at Grid Down Consulting, I've worked with over 600 high net worth families and helped them build a family fallback location for their loved ones and for some corporate entities as well. But I have never seen the amount of business in the last 6 months. I can't even, I'm turning people away. I can't even take them all. It's been, everybody's very, very concerned and everybody wants things done yesterday.
So what exactly is it that you do, just so for the audience, so they know, people are consulting with you about strategies on how to prepare for when things get wild?
Yeah. So Grid Down Consulting is the name of my company, and we primarily work with high net worth families. My book, Survival Theory 2, is kind of my payback to the blue collar, white collar guys that can't afford a multi-million-dollar survival retreat. Essentially, from step one, I help them locate an appropriate property that's well tucked away. Typically, we're looking at like 1,000 acres to 3,000 acre ranches, sometimes even more. And then going out and taking a look at the property, figure out where the best locations are to put the infrastructure, from security, from not being visible from any roads nearby. I work with EMP hardened off-grid solar, underground tunnel networks, and like setting up thermal security systems, the whole 9 yards. And The other thing I do a lot with is extraction planning for these families. Like I have families in Miami and in New York City and LA, and how do we get out of the city if everything shuts down and the roads are blocked and we can't get anywhere? So, but with that said, my strategy for setting up off-grid survival retreats, kind of in the Hollywood sphere, and there's a couple other guys that kind of do what I do, and they're kind of real big as far as building bunkers. I mean, the bulletproof houses with alligator moats and razor wire. My philosophy is live to fight another day. I do a lot with tunnels and getting out the back 40, fighting back guerrilla warfare, not fighting pitched battles. 90%, 95% of the clients' long-term food and their supplies and their extra ammo is somewhere else on the property, not in the four walls of their house. Because that's a common thing. Everybody wants to put everything in their house, and then they have to die to protect it, because if they leave or if they flee because of big groups coming down the road, then they lose everything. Where my strategy is more secrecy and less Alamo, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And, it's something I'm just getting into a new property pretty soon here. And it's something I'm considering is like, there should be some sort of fallback plan. I'm not even sure if you remember the original episode of Doomsday Preppers. There was a guy and his motto was, I can't remember, something to the extent of,
when survival's the goal, it's into the spider hole. Yeah, it's cozy in here.
he made all these spider holes around his property. That's what he called them. And there's like these little tunnels. And his strategy was that if he was ever raided, that he would put all these caches in and around his property. And then he would kind of let the guys go into his house and then he would, try to fight back in that way. But let's just say for a second, I'm one of these high net worth individuals that comes to you, and I got a lot of money. Let's play a fantasy game here. And so what is your first piece of advice to me? Let's say if I have a lot of money and if I don't have a lot of money.
Well, those are two very far ends of the spectrum, right? If you do have a lot of money, the first thing is getting you a piece of property, end of a dead end road, at least 10 miles from a small town, at least a 2-hour drive outside of any major cities. And then the first thing on my list is looking at the nuclear facilities that are nearby. So as I'm also a member of the Joint Services Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, which is a military wargaming operation looking at the grid down threats. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was there at those meetings, and it was very disturbing the level to which they're prepared for a national grid outage. So our nuclear facilities, the active rods will drop down into the cooling pools, but you have to keep water flowing over those spent fuel rods to keep it from melting, the facility from melting down. The problem is they've never had those generators EMP tests, or at least they didn't a couple years ago at the last meeting I was at. They have 7 days of backup diesel to run those generators, and they have a civilian contract for resupply. 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, no trucker is going to be driving a diesel tanker from Houston right up to Maryland. So the key is being at least 50 miles away from any nuclear facility. The next thing I look at is I wouldn't be real close to a military base or somewhere that's an extreme target for a nuclear strike. So when you start punching these things into the map, it starts minimizing where you can go, especially if you're on the East Coast of the United States. There are areas on the border, Tennessee, North Carolina, all the way up through eastern Kentucky and the whole state of West Virginia. I love West Virginia. If you're on the West Coast, I think that's a great place. But that's the first thing. And then the second thing is looking at the property. Does it have a primary, secondary source of water that we can get access to? What is the topography? So when I just left Phoenix, Arizona here, I just got back last night from a new client. So certain areas of the country where it's really flat, it's hard to hide. So, I mean, there's a benefit if you have thermal radar system that you can see people from a long distance away, but they can see you from a long distance away and watch you from a long distance away. So I like rolling topography. I like the ability to grow food. So another thing that a lot of people look at is, the first thing they think of a bug out or a survival retreat is I want to be on the side of a mountain somewhere. Okay. That's good in some aspects, but you're not going to typically be able to garden real well unless you've spent years cultivating the soil and putting organic matter in there and things like that. So there's a lot of factors I look for a property. And then the next phase after we find the property is kind of the design phase. So I do a lot of the design work myself because most houses today have to have electricity, like ranch houses, and there's ductwork and there's fans that pump heat and AC all the way to the far ends of the house. We're looking at typically vertical construction, so you can regulate the heat and the air, the heat in the winter and the air in the summertime, or even if you don't have enough power to run air conditioning, the house is still livable. Whereas a lot of like ranch houses, they're going to get really hot, right? They're not designed for airflow and for evacuating the heat. We put cupolas on all our survival retreats. If you know what those are, you see them at the top of barns. They allow the heat to escape from the ridge there. So there's 100 different things that I do. But again, like I said, my properties are kind of fortresses, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of security features. We don't do bulletproof windows, but we do high security windows with a polymer film in between them, like the Anderson 400 hurricane windows that will slow somebody down. If you're starting to I want to have a bulletproof house, why? Like, are you intending to have battles at your house? Because that's just going to go, in my opinion, that's going to go south on you. I'm not saying you don't defend against one or two guys, but if there's bigger fish coming at you, my philosophy is live to fight another day. Get the women and children out, get everybody out. And like you were mentioning from that other guy from Doomsday Preppers, is like fighting them on my terms, right? Not on their terms. So there's a lot of things. So on a budget, a simple thing, a device that we put in my survival retreats called the burglar bomb. Okay, so it looks like a smoke detector. It's got 4 pepper gas canisters in the system, and it's motion activated. So the last person out the tunnel flips the switch, and as soon as motion is sensed in the house, it fills the house up with pepper gas. And then it switches to the next canister. So you can keep somebody out of your house if they don't have gas masks for 4 or 6 hours. That gives you time to get your family away, figure out what you're going to do. And I don't think you have to fight them every time. If you do my strategy where 95% of your stuff's somewhere else, let them take the 3 or 5% of food that they find in your house. Let them take the low hanging fruit, move on down the road. They cleaned you out again, and then you can move back in and continue operations. So everybody wants to be like SEAL Team 6. I get it, right? And I think having the best weapons, and more importantly, the best training with those weapons is critically important. But no location, any special ops guys can tell you, no location's indefensible. I mean, steel shutters, you start doing a lot of this stuff, you might as well just advertise in the local town that you're building a prepper retreat.
Well, that's a really good point. I'm interested in learning more about some of these things that you're talking about. I mean, I think, if I could choose between a house made of stone that has some bulletproofing, that would be useful in my opinion, anyways. At least for a spontaneous crisis of sorts, it might be better than drywall, anyways. But there's different types of building materials. Like there's ICF, which is like a concrete material, which also has
insulated concrete forms.
Yeah.
So when we start talking about like material wise, yes, ICF forms it does give you ballistic protection, and they are pretty efficient house. They're also very expensive to build. And with a lot of clients, like the client I was just at, I mean, it's I think it was 6 miles of Forest Service road to even get to the property. You're not going to get a convoy of concrete trucks back there very easily.
Yeah.
So everything gets more expensive when you start building remote. One of my favorite building systems right now is magnesium oxide SIPS panels. That's MGO SIPS. SIPs are a structurally insulated paneling system. So just imagine like foam. It's a foam core with, typically you have plywood on the outside, but this new product has magnesium oxide board. And it's waterproof, it's fireproof, it's insect proof, it's hypoallergenic. It's a finished surface on the inside. You don't have to hang drywall when you're done. You just you do the seams where the panels fit together, and it comes from the factory with all your windows and doors cut out. It's like numbered, and within 2 days you can rough in a house on a rural property. So, and they're super insulated. I mean, the R value on these things are super crazy. They're hurricane proof. So there's a lot of benefits to go that way. So as far as ballistic protection, what we typically do with my clients, a lot of times every client I have has guns. Almost every client, I think every client I have has guns. So we get them set up with a range on their property so they can practice and train. And you just buy a lot of like 24-inch by 30-inch I forget IPF. The steel targets, the silhouette targets, AR-500 steel targets. And then after the collapse, you bring all those steel targets in and you place them at your firing locations below certain windows for ballistic protection.
What about, yeah, I'm going to have to look into those magnesium oxide panels. That sounds very interesting.
And we were talking about cupolas, right? So the cupolas, the functional cupolas we have, they're typically 6 feet by 6 feet at each end of the peak. And those have ballistic, either AR-500 steel or ballistic fiberglass inside of them, because those are going to be your firing positions from up high. So we do put ballistic protection in these houses. But if you go and try and ballistically protect the entire house, it just gets really expensive. And, some clients, I have clients that wanted that, and there was no budget, so they went that direction. So, yeah.
I guess it'd be good for fire protection too, because arson might be a consideration.
Yep. Forest fires, there ain't going to be no firefighters out there trying to help you fight a forest fire either. So, arson protection. And there's some really neat videos on magnesium oxide SIPS panels on YouTube where they start like a shed on fire and half it's built with magnesium oxide SIPS and the other's traditional framing. And this fire gets super hot. Like, I mean, they filled it with like lumber and stuff like that. They set this thing on fire. And on the outside of the SIPS panel, you could put your hand on it and it only went up like 10 degrees.
Wow.
So it's crazy how, and when it was
Unbelievable.
done, half the shed was standing there and the other half wasn't.
Very cool. Very cool. I got so many questions. These high security windows you're talking about. Now, is that something you have to install? Because I've put some of that stuff, I think it was like a 3M window film, but I
Uh-huh.
hear you're supposed to install it with the window. Is that correct? Or can you just overlay it onto the window?
So if you're on a budget, overlaying it on the window will definitely help. It'll definitely slow somebody down. But the ones that come from the factory are two panes of glass, and that film's like sealed. It's sandwiched between two panes of glass.
Hmm.
So it's better that way. But again, if you've got new windows and you don't want to replace all the windows on your house or your cabin, then go that route for sure.
Okay. What about Pesco barriers? Have you ever looked into that as a or any sort of like makeshift, something that you could just fill up with sand if you did want to make some makeshift fortification? A buddy of mine was talking about building dragon's teeth out of like quickcrete and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on those kind of things? Like as a temporary, like, shit hits the fan and you want to keep people out of a certain place, you want to slow them down, you dig a ditch and maybe put some of these barriers up.
Yeah, 100%. So I was just working with a client down in Texas where his road Texas is flat, right? And he doesn't want people getting too close. Down the road one direction and down the road another direction were these small, short bridges. And he has a tractor, and up the road there's an area where there's those concrete barriers, right? Like the dividing concrete barriers. He's
Yeah.
gonna go up and grab a couple of those and just put them on the bridge. And we had him made up, make signage up already, bridge out
Right.
signage, so it looks official, right? It's not like you're just stopping somebody. And he's has them sitting outside so they get a little faded and rusted. When the time comes, he'll put that up. As far as driveways, I prefer to use trees, right? So if you dig a ditch, if you do something and you put a bunch of razor wire, it's just the people that are coming up your driveway. It's just kind of like ding, 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 like light bulbs are going off. Like, okay, there's something very valuable up here, right?
Mhm.
What I would typically do is find some trees along my driveway, the close big trees, and fall them along the driveway facing that direction, if that makes sense. So I want the trees on the road, not across, because then you just cut an 8 foot section out of it, right? I want the trees falling down on the road in the direction of the road. This will also allow you, they're going to have to get some chainsaws out to start cutting them. That'll give you a heads up, so some of my rural clients, like down the road, a certain distance where you can still hear a chainsaw, we're going to fall some trees down there, not on their driveway, but even down the road before you even get to them. So those types of barriers, sandbags, every client I have, hey, buy a bunch of sandbags, because again, we were talking about AR 500 steel firing positions from inside the house. You may want to build some firing positions outside the house, or you could even use sandbags inside the house under a window well or something like
Mhm.
that. So yes, what I don't want to do, I really don't want to I really don't want to have the image of a fortress from the outside. I really, really don't.
Yeah.
So even after the grid comes down, you're out in the rural area. There's gonna be people wandering around the woods, locals hunting, and they may be salt of the earth people, right? And they just come across and they see this house, right? And it's okay, there's a house there, and they've seen a lot of houses, cabins in the woods, right?
Yeah.
But if they start seeing razor wire and sandbag, machine gun nests and stuff like that, to me, that gets their wheels turning. They start
Yeah.
talking to the neighbors. Hey, there's something going on up there. But none of us have food. Let's go up there. So I really want to keep things low key from a perspective. So a lot of my survival retreats from the outside. So I mean, I've built something that look like lodges, or sometimes the client, they just want a certain motif, which is fine as long as it blends in with the other properties in the area. But something I really like to do, especially properties they don't live there, is we're building a lot of like barn dominiums, right? So from the outside, even before the collapse, it just looks like a barn sitting in the field. If there's an elk hunter that wanders through in normal times, it's not going to stick in their head, because what we do is, so like on the inside, it's a timber frame home. It's magnesium oxide SIPS construction. And then in the great room, I mean, we'll have a whole wall of glazing and windows, and there'll be it won't be like a barn on the inside. And then on the outside, we'll have big sliding barn doors that close over top all that glazing. And then all your sliding doors going onto your patio from your master bedroom. We have barn doors, wooden barn doors that close in front of that. The upstairs bedroom windows all have wooden louvers. So whenever you button up at the end of the weekend, you go home to the city, you close everything up, and it looks like a barn sitting in a field. It doesn't, but on the inside, you can have all the creature comforts of home.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides. It's a double-edged sword, right? If you're trying to put all these fortifications in place, it's not very gray man. And
no, it's not.
I always go back to this example where I used to know this homeless guy, and I wanted to buy him a brand new like military tactical backpack because this guy was pretty cool. You know, he's had some cool stories to tell, and he declined the offer, even though his backpack was all tattered. And he's like, I don't want anything to do with that. And the main reason was because it would attract too much attention. So the convenience and the luxury aspect have a drawback of potentially attracting people. So I agree with you that you want to kind of keep a low profile. And I think there's probably some ways that you could conceal these things. Like I'm thinking like dragon's teeth, you could potentially have that, and you could have that overgrown with certain types of moss or something like that. I mean, you could disguise certain things in certain ways. And like you're saying with the trees, you have them there at the ready. You can fall them. You know, you don't necessarily have these big giant barriers saying, come and see what's inside, because of course we know that's going to be enticing to people who are desperate.
Can I dig into that gray man idea a little bit with you? Okay, so this is a very, very popular concept on YouTube. Okay, so so my clients, I also, besides survival retreats, I do a lot with building extraction planning. What does that look like? Okay, so I'm just going to pick a fictional city. There's a fictional city that is 5-6 hours from the client's survival retreat. And this is a big client. This is a B client, a billionaire client, right? And they have a whole bunch of people they want to get there. So what we did is we got a EMP hardened short bus with a DT 466 diesel engine and standard shift bus for transportation. We built 2 EMP-proof tactical vehicles, 2008, 2010 F350s. This is if you want the newest 100% EMP hardened vehicle is a 2008, 2010 F350. Diesel conversion specialist sells the entire engine kit, right? Where you can swap a first gen Cummins engine in there, P-pump Cummins engine in there, and it's purely mechanical drivetrain. So even if everything else gets fried, it's still functional. So we have 2 of those trucks. One drives 2 miles in front of the bus and the truck to look for traffic jams or even possibly ambushes, and radio back because they're maneuverable. They can shoot, they can move, they can get down in the median. The bus, you're not turning the bus around quick, right? So they give them a heads up where they need to do something else. So what I'm getting at, the gray man idea, right? So when I do this, it's like, what do we want to portray while we're traveling? Okay, and that's a big question. And the majority of people say you want to blend in with flannel shirt, you don't want a tactical backpack, you want a camping backpack, things like this, right? So my philosophy on, and again, all this advice I'm giving is based on major scenarios, long-term events, right? Short-term natural disasters, do whatever you want.
Yeah, go to a hotel.
Go to a hotel, right? So these long-term events that you have to get out of there, bioengineered weapon, grid down event, whatever the case may be. You got to get out day 1 or day 2. And once you get out of the city and you're in the country, I firmly believe, I know a lot of people might disagree, day 3, day 4, country people, 2-lane back roads, you're relatively safe traveling 4 or 5 days in the country. I don't mean in the city, I mean in the country. So a lot of people's mentality when they start thinking gray man is, I'm wandering the open road like the movie The Road, right? And I'm out here moving about during the apocalypse. My philosophy is get where you need to go within the first week. And that first week, my opinion is I would rather look like somebody you don't want to screw with than just a regular Joe, right? Mm-hmm. I would want to, the plate carrier, go tactical, the vehicles I was just talking about, those 2 tactical vehicles. We get security company like G4S or Academy or something like that. We get signage for the magnetic signage that goes on the trucks after the day of the event. Same with the bus. We painted it prison gray. I had them make up a signage for a fake prison for the side. Like, who's going to want to try and hitch a ride from a prison bus, right? So these are things to just sort of avoid people from stopping you, from dealing with you, even if you hit a police checkpoint somewhere. If you have the patches, G4S patches or something, or make up a fake security company, there's a chance you can talk your way through it. Say, hey, we got to go, right? And you look official, they may just wave you through, right? So these are things, thinking outside the box. So the gray man, I'm getting long-winded here, I apologize, but the gray man concept, right? Good. If you're wandering around the open road a month in, you're traveling from place to place, I think that's crazy to begin with. I think you need to get somewhere and hunker down. But if you're out on the open road, in my opinion, if I'm Joe Blow, redneck, and there's two groups that come by, one of them is all tactical up, and the other one looks like a family traveling. Which one's the easier target? Which one's the low-hanging fruit to go after? So that's my opinion. There is a time and place for the gray man idea, but I see a lot of this kind of this urban prep, and I'm going to wander around the city looking for resource. I'm going to throw a dirty garbage bag, and I'm going to carry a regular pack. If you're carrying a pack and someone's starving to death, they don't care what you're wearing. They're going to shoot you and dig through your corpse to see what you have on you. So I guess my point is, don't put too much on the gray man concept, as in keeping you safe. I'm just not 100% convinced that's the case.
Yeah, I think we could maybe even look at it as, pre-collapse, you want to kind of blend in. You don't want
100%.
Yeah, so maybe that's where the gray man kind of comes in, where you just want to establish and be in line with a baseline of your community, whatever that might be, flannel shirts.
100%, Nate. So with my clients, when they go to the local grocery store, I'm like, don't wear tactical clothing. You're this guy up here. Blend in with the populace when you're in there buying stuff or you're going to a restaurant. Don't drive some like $100,000, $120,000 kitted out Hummer into town and jump out, with your 511 pants. You might as well. Again,
I'm guilty, man. Anybody want to buy a truck? It's got a cool winch on it. But that there is that intimidation factor. You're right, because it also communicates, like we're a well-organized and we're ready, right? So you don't want to mess with that for sure. I mean, the only way, you're a gray man is really beneficial in those situations is if you're really trying to keep a low profile, perhaps. But if you're trying to get somewhere and you're doing so with intention and you're deliberate and you look the part, then yeah, make sure that you that's a great way of looking at it. I'm glad you brought some nuance to that, because I think a lot of people just think gray man all the time, but like you're saying, there's benefits to sometimes displaying a different type of persona.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
So you said it much shorter than I did.
No, that's keep it long-winded, man, because this is what people come to this channel for, and we can be as long-winded as we need to. So I think it's great to provide people more information than less. What about these thermal radars? What is that all about?
Okay, thermalradar.com. That is, in my opinion, the #1 security system for a survival retreat location. They're not cheap. You're going to run about 20,000 for the system. The one I would recommend is called the Hydro or the Hydra. It is a thermal camera that spins 360 degrees. Okay, so you put it up on a tall pole or on the top of a flagpole is typically what we do, and it spins 360 degrees. And technically it stops there. I think every 5 degrees it takes a picture. So it looks like it's spinning, but it's taking a bunch of pictures. There's AI in there that can tell the difference between a human and a truck, or a human and a deer. It's good out to a mile. So it's a 640 thermal camera. And then underneath of that, it has a 60x night vision PTZ camera. So as soon as it picks up any kind of heat signature, the other camera turns and zooms in, right? So you can't hide from thermal unless you're going to carry a mirror through the woods. A lot of prepping security still is like 1970s Army manual, get a couple guys, go on patrol, walk the perimeter of the property. The Army did that for a reason. If you were that guy walking that patrol, you are the alarm. When you get shot, that's when everybody comes. But I don't want to take that risk with my nephew or my wife or whoever's turn it is to walk patrol. Yeah, so the Army looks at people as kind of like numbers. So the idea of walking perimeter patrols, in my opinion, is not a good scenario. So the two things, multiple things. I think a handheld thermal. If you're on a budget, you can pick up a handheld thermal monocular we were talking about a cupola, keeping an eye on your property at night without actually having to go out there. Would be the first step. You can pick those up for a couple grand. The second step is a thermal drone. And so, you can look at your neighbors at 2:00 in the morning and you can see who's kicking, who's still there. If you hear a sound out in the woods, instead of saying, "Hey, Bob, go check that out," I'm flying the thermal camera over there and checking it out, right? I don't want to go over there and catch a bullet. So the thermal drones are important. But that thermal radar system, it really is, it is kind of where, because you can be from inside the comfort of your heated or your air-conditioned house, can keep 360-degree surveillance on your property with that system. They use it at like substations and refineries and different locations. The military uses it. And so I actually saw one. I had a client with a bunch of property down near the border in Texas, and there I saw one up on a pole. They were using that system down there, looking for immigrants crossing the border as well. So that's something to take a look at. On the drones, I just want to take one step back. On the drones, it's really important. If you're going to get a thermal drone, do not go with DJI or any of the big name manufacturers. DJI tracks everything, literally everything. They record everything that you record because it's a Chinese company. We'll let that aside. But what you need to look for in a drone, you need to look for an industrial drone that can fly line of sight without GPS. They have these drones that can fly and line of sight with a camera, with lights, that can record like coal mines, right? But there's no signal with the GPS satellites. That's really important because in an EMP event, the GPS satellites any low orbit satellites are going to come out of the sky. So you're not going to, that drone, like the DJI, if they don't sense GPS satellites, they don't take off. So you need to make sure you get one that has like an industrial brand drone that can fly line of sight and not just with geofencing and GPS.
Yeah, I think there's a company called Autel that makes something.
Yes,
I don't know.
that's one of them.
That's one of them, hey? Okay. Yeah, so, we're talking about these big budget options here, and I can hear people in the comment section already. What about us? So I know you can get some, Gen 1 night vision stuff for pretty cheap. It's not going to be thermal, but what other, recommendations, maybe just going back over some of the things we've talked about already, what are some lower budget options? Let's start maybe at the level of the property. What if I don't have a bug out location? I'm in the city and I got nowhere to go.
Okay. As far as bug out retreat property, something I didn't throw in there that we do at every location, which I think is critically important. Like I have a client, he's his property, I can't name names, but his property is a beautiful tucked away property, but he's got all this iron gates and stone columns leading into his property. And I told him, I said, all that's, your wife may complain or she comes get out of you, but all that's got to come out. I want this entrance. Pour gravel over the first section of asphalt there until you get back into the trees. After you get back in the trees from the road, pave it with gold paving stones. I don't really care, but what's visible from the road, I want it to look like an access road. You have to have a mailbox out there. Fine. Day one, that mailbox is coming out. Any kind of signage that's down there is coming out. I like to see just a bar gate or a simple cattle gate of some sort. I have all my clients make up either for gas pipeline signage, cell phone tower signage, some kind of access road signage. Have it made today, get it made official, metal, make it look like something else down the road. Sit it out in the sun. When the SHTF, take that down, close that gate, put that stuff on the gate, you can eliminate probably 70% of the starving people walking just because it looks like an access road. It doesn't look like a driveway. You know, I'm starving. I don't have a lot of energy. I'm not going to waste my time walking up in here. It's just an access road, right? If you can kill 70% of the low hanging fruit from even walking up your driveway, that doesn't cost almost nothing, right? So for survival retreat, that's a low hanging fruit that I would recommend everyone do. Be as nondescript down there. Let the weeds grow up. Don't have like flowers or if you have that stuff, have the ability to remove it. Okay. So as far as bugging out, I mean, that's the big thing. Most of the preparedness channels, it's binary, right? You either bug out and you live off the open road or live off the national forest, like the Legend of Mick Dodd, because you're a blue collar guy, right? You don't have $2 million to build a place or $10 million. So, you either bug out and wander the open road or live off national forest, or I stay in my house in the city or even in the suburbs. Okay. If we're talking a long-term collapse event, long-term grid down event, starvation, disease, societal collapse, 90% of the population can die in the first year. You don't want to be near people, right? You don't, it's a matter of time. Your house is not defensible. It's a matter of time. You have to sleep sometime. You have to go out back. People will give you all kind of strategies. Put a 6-foot privacy fence and garden. Like your starving neighbors aren't going to figure out your gardening behind your 6-foot privacy fence, or throw trash out in the front, spray paint your doors and windows, and no one's going to figure out anyone's living there. You have to cook sometime. You have to heat. There's just I don't think it's. So again, short-term things, again, do whatever you want. Stay in a hotel, stay home, whatever. But if we're talking about a long-term event, in my professional opinion, you have to get out of mass population centers. Your best chance of survival is having a place where you have food and where you have the least amount of human interaction for that first year until the mass die-off is done. So if you're a blue-collar guy, there are strategies. So in my book, Survival Theory 2, I lay out like 6 different strategies for people on nothing to very little budget. Okay. One of them, I'll give you an example. One of my clients had a 4-season RV. What I had him do was we reverse engineered the area that he wanted to travel to, right? 2 hours from his city. It was like an hour and 45 minutes, but it was off the beaten path. We went on Google satellite view. We found some dead end roads, found some farms that were kind of tucked in behind some rolling hills. They were kind of like back in there, right? We picked like 6 or 8 locations, and then he went for a Sunday drive and just went and knocked on doors and just said, hey, my name's Ken. I've got this RV. You've got a beautiful farm here. I would like to rent a little postage stamp of, ground from here to park my RV. Me and my wife and kids, I grew up in the country, don't be a city boy. I grew up in the country. We just, it's stuffy, but I have to be there for work. We'd love to just come out here on some weekends and just relax. We'll respect your property. We'll keep it mowed. I help you bale hay, just don't mention prepping. Don't mention the end of the world of the zombie apocalypse. Just see if you can, and, within
build a relationship.
He found one. He found a guy, and it was an older couple that had had a bunch of old farm machinery, right? Yeah. And he did that. And over the course of a year, he built a really great relationship with that older couple. They stopped gardening a couple years before that because they were older. He's like, hey, let's put a garden in. We'll help you. You know what I mean? So they would go out there and they would pull weeds and they would help with the garden. And so they just got this great relationship right there. And he's in the process right now of buying that section of land to put a cabin there. But I mean, that's one strategy. You're tucked away. You've kind of looked at the farm from a survival retreat perspective. It's not like a farmhouse. It's right on the asphalt. It had like a driveway going back in there. So these are things that we look at. There's a strategy where I talk about, there's a lot of very kind of rural farm to table bed and breakfasts that are kind of like farm to table, and they have their own chickens and they supply their own meat, and they're kind of like a poor man's dude ranch, right? Bed and breakfast. And if it sits off the like I said, a kind of sits off the road, look at it from a survival retreat perspective, you might only find 1 or 2 within a 2-hour drive of the city you live in. Go there and stay there for a weekend. Don't even mention prepping. Don't mention anything. get to know the owners, and then, kind of ask them, "Oh, do you have a bunch of kids?" Get to know them. Talk. People like to talk about their kids and their grandkids. If they have like 8 kids and 24 grandkids, that may not be the best place, because a lot of those may end up showing up there when the time comes, right? So like, find the best case scenario in that type of environment.
Well, I
And
think
then,
so few people are actually going to go and do what you're saying. And
right.
so few people, we're so accustomed to, we only go somewhere if there's a sign pointing as to where to go, forgetting that, there's a hell of a lot of people out there who are probably just, twiddling their thumbs in their rural property all day, probably waiting desperately for somebody to just come by just to remind them that they're still alive. So, I think it's actually a brilliant strategy to just go and explore. Now, you have to be careful when you do something like that, of course, because people can still be a little bit jumpy, and you got to watch your approach angle. But I think there's definitely merit to what you're saying, and where there's a will,
if you have a wife or a kid to come along with you too, that will pull their guard down a ton. And then the last step with that would be, if you found a property like that, take all your long-term food and put it in the closest storage unit to that property. Get your stuff out of the house. Get it down there close by. After the collapse happens, I would buy food for them as well. And then after the collapse happens, you just show up. Hey, I need to rent a room for a night. Give it a night or two, hang out, and then break the news. And if you'd have to come out with the right angle. Just say, hey, I've got a bunch of food and supplies down there. Can I just stay here in this room at your bed and breakfast? I'll help provide security. I'll help you guard, and we'll take care of the chickens together. I've got extra food for you. And I know that's a weird conversation. You don't have it before the event. You have it the day after the event, right? I think, again, it's not a perfect plan, but that is a better survival scenario than sitting in the middle of town, hunkered down,
or just running off
door after door after door, get kicked into your apartment complex, waiting for it to be yours.
Yeah, exactly. Or just running off into the woods and hoping you're gonna.
Yeah, that's not gonna work.
Wild man. Yeah. I mean, there
From
might
a guy that actually did that in the military. That was my job. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape, training people how to survive. 99.5% of the people that plan that, they just don't have the life skills to do it long term. They just don't. And even if you could convince me you did in normal times, and like today, I went on this 6-week backpacking trip and I only took my pack. Okay, great. You've convinced me you have the life skills. The problem is all the other yahoos in the same patch of woods, the same national forest that you're running around, that don't have your skill set. You've got to build a fire sometime. You've got to cook your meat, your squirrel sometime. They're going to kill all the game in that forest within 3 or 4 weeks. We have hunting seasons for a reason. There's not going to be anything brown in that forest. So your ability to survive off the land today doesn't hold true 4 weeks after an event either.
Yeah, it's what about, here in Canada, we have tons of boreal forest. Now, accessing it is another thing, because the only way you can access the forest, unless you have like a float plane or something like that, is through roads, logging roads. And usually some of those logging roads get deactivated to keep people out of there. Yep. But you could potentially, and I'm sure you have some sort of equivalent here. We call it crown land, and you're legally allowed to squat on crown land for 28 days, but you can't build any permanent structures. And I'm not suggesting anybody do anything that is illegal here. I'm just saying that, there's plenty of places that have never had a foot set on by man in Canada. Like, we're talking about thousands of square miles of just, pristine wilderness. Had you the plan to get there, maybe you could set something up. But again,
those areas are very cold in the winter, right?
What's that?
Yeah, those areas, because I've got clients a couple hours north of Montreal. Those areas are very cold, and you get a lot of snow. It's very cold for a long period of time. Correct?
It is. But I will say though, if you have a wood stove and you have a lot of trees, that's a way to heat your home in the winter time.
Oh no, I'm with you there. I don't mean as far as heating your body. I mean as far as foraging, as finding something to eat.
Yeah,
as
you'd be limited to proteins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So And that's a tough. I mean, what's the show?
I'm
Alaska?
saying that as like a last ditch,
Last resort. Sure,
exactly.
So again, I'm not gonna. That is a strategy. That there's a show called the Alaskan. I forget what it was. It was some trappers that had some grandfathered clause cabins up in the north of Alaska, and I'll be honest, it takes a kind of a special breed of person to make a long haul at that. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying there aren't people here that don't have those skills of trapping because at that point, if you get far enough out, there is still going to be protein, like you said. There's going to be game that's not going to get shot off, like in down the lower 48 down here, especially on the East Coast. If there's a patch, there's going to be everybody and their brother's going to be out there with Pappy's shotgun or deer rifle, and just everything's going to die. Yeah. Anything that's moving in the forest is going to be dead. Up in those big expanses, yes, you could, but it's just because I've done it. I'm just saying it's tough sledding.
It's not easy, and I think a lot of the survival shows, people forget that they have a team on watch 24/7, and
that's right.
They can get extracted if need be, and
a lot of them do on those shows. A lot of them, even the experts. Yeah. I think there's Naked Afraid. There's a couple of survival shows, but
Alone.
A lot of them end up getting pulled out, and those are the experts. Those are the people that are supposedly have the skills to do it, right? FEMA has zero plan of action for a nationwide grid down event. The United States military has zero plan of action to deal with a long-term grid down event.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.